It was supposed to be the perfect night, Sarah's 30th birthday, celebrated with a gathering of our closest friends, family, and several of her colleagues from work. We chose a cozy restaurant nestled in a quiet suburb near San Diego, one of those charming little places with soft, ambient lighting, exposed wooden beams on the ceiling, and small candles flickering warmly on each table. The atmosphere was relaxed and intimate, exactly what Sarah had wanted. I had spent weeks planning this celebration down to the last detail, determined to make her milestone birthday truly memorable. When Sarah walked into the restaurant, her face lit up with genuine surprise and happiness as our guests cheered. Friends embraced her warmly, and family members showered her with affection. I stood off to the side, quietly proud that my efforts had paid off. Sarah was radiant, moving gracefully from guest to guest, thanking everyone with heartfelt sincerity. Watching her, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had been good to us. Married for 5 years, we had built a comfortable home and filled it with laughter and shared dreams. I sipped a glass of red wine, feeling content as I observed the room filled with lively conversation, warm laughter, and the pleasant hum of mingling guests. Everything seemed perfect. But then I noticed something odd. My gaze fell upon Alex, a younger guy from Sarah's marketing department whom I had met briefly a few times at company functions. Alex was around 28, tall and athletic, with an effortless charisma that made him popular wherever he went. Tonight, however, something about his presence bothered me. He seemed overly attentive to Sarah, who didn't appear to discourage it. Initially, I brushed off the feeling, attributing my reaction to mild jealousy or perhaps even insecurity. But as the evening continued, my discomfort grew. Sarah's interactions with Alex started subtly, small gestures that others might not have noticed. A gentle touch on his arm as she laughed at his jokes, a prolonged glance filled with amusement as they exchanged whispers. My heart tightened slightly each time I noticed her proximity to him, a closeness that felt somehow inappropriate given the circumstances. Was I overreacting? I tried to reassure myself that Sarah had always been naturally affectionate and outgoing, and tonight was her special day after all. She deserved to enjoy herself fully, free from my petty suspicions. Still, Alex's behavior set off quiet alarm bells in my mind. Occasionally, when he saw me looking in their direction, he returned my gaze boldly, an unmistakable smirk playing on his lips. It was as though he knew exactly how I felt, and enjoyed provoking me deliberately. His confidence irritated me deeply. I felt my hand involuntarily tightening around my wine glass, realizing how swiftly my mood had shifted from joyous celebration to quiet anxiety. I glanced around, wondering if anyone else noticed the uncomfortable dynamics playing out, but guests appeared oblivious, too engrossed in their own conversations. A part of me desperately wanted to intervene, to casually approach Sarah and Alex and insert myself smoothly into their conversation, reclaiming my rightful place beside my wife. Yet pride held me back. I refused to seem possessive or jealous in front of our family and friends. It was Sarah's birthday, and the last thing I wanted was to ruin the evening with unnecessary drama. As I struggled with my internal conflict, I began replaying recent memories, looking for signs that something might have changed in our marriage. Had Sarah mentioned Alex more frequently lately? Had she seemed distracted or distant in recent days? Nothing obvious came to mind, and yet uncertainty gnawed persistently at my thoughts, refusing to fade away. I despised feeling this vulnerable, second-guessing the woman I loved deeply, and hated even more that Alex had successfully planted seeds of doubt in my mind with nothing but a few ambiguous glances and touches. Attempting to regain control over my emotions, I forced myself to appear calm and relaxed. I joined a conversation about vacation plans, smiling and nodding politely as a friend described a recent trip to Italy. But behind my carefully maintained facade, I remained acutely aware of Sarah's position in the room and how frequently she laughed at Alex's every comment. Each burst of laughter sent an unpleasant jolt through me, increasing the tension simmering silently beneath my outwardly composed demeanor. Time seemed to slow unbearably as I watched the evening unfold, my discomfort steadily growing. I was trapped in an emotional limbo, unsure whether to confront the situation directly or continue feigning ignorance, preserving the peace for the sake of Sarah's special night. Yet beneath it all, I sensed unmistakably that Alex had deliberately turned this celebration into something else entirely, subtly challenging my place by Sarah's side. I realized with quiet dread that this evening, carefully planned and meticulously arranged, was rapidly slipping beyond my control. As the evening wore on, the atmosphere in the restaurant grew increasingly lively. The sound of clinking glasses, warm laughter, and friendly conversation filled the air, masking the turmoil simmering quietly inside me. Sarah continued to float from guest to guest, graciously accepting birthday wishes and gifts, her charming smile brightening every interaction. Outwardly, everything seemed to be exactly as I'd planned, a joyous celebration of my wife's milestone birthday. Yet inwardly, my mood darkened steadily as I observed Alex's behavior becoming progressively more brazen. Despite my best efforts to appear indifferent, my attention kept drifting back to Sarah and Alex, whose closeness now seemed impossible to dismiss as mere friendliness. The subtle, flirtatious gestures I'd noticed earlier had evolved into something overtly provocative. Their laughter grew louder, Sarah's cheeks flushed from wine, or perhaps from Alex's relentless flattery. Each time he leaned closer to whisper something in her ear, she giggled softly, casting quick glances in my direction as if checking to see my reaction. My jaw tightened involuntarily, frustration building at how openly they seemed to flaunt their connection in front of our friends and family. As I struggled to suppress my growing irritation, I felt increasingly isolated, wondering if anyone else at the table was noticing the inappropriate chemistry between them. Perhaps everyone was simply being polite, choosing to ignore the tension that had subtly infiltrated what was supposed to be a joyful occasion. Or perhaps, more unsettlingly, the guests assumed that I was fully aware and tolerantly approving of Sarah's flirtatious behavior. My discomfort reached new heights when Alex turned the conversation toward my passion for running. It started casually enough, but his tone quickly shifted into mockery. He openly ridiculed running as trivial and meaningless, dismissing it as something that required no true athletic skill or strength. Each word was deliberately aimed at undermining me, painting my devotion to the sport as childish and pathetic. Sarah stood beside him, quietly smiling, nodding occasionally, and never once stepping in to defend my interests. Her silence felt like a painful betrayal, cutting deeper than Alex's cruel jabs. I swallowed my anger, determined not to rise to his provocations. I knew Alex's intentions clearly now. He wanted to publicly humiliate me, to position himself as the stronger, more desirable man in Sarah's eyes. He seemed determined to prove, in front of everyone present, that I was somehow less worthy of Sarah's affection. Each derisive comment drew subtle glances from the guests, some of whom began shifting uncomfortably, sensing the underlying hostility in Alex's voice. Yet no one intervened. They were trapped, just as I was, between politeness and confrontation. I glanced again at Sarah, desperate for her to step forward, to defend me or at least to redirect the conversation away from Alex's ridicule. Instead, she appeared almost amused, her smile broadening slightly each time Alex landed another verbal jab. I realized, with a painful sinking sensation, that my humiliation seemed to entertain her. I felt my pride and dignity slipping away slowly, leaving me exposed and vulnerable in front of everyone whose opinions mattered most. Throughout it all, I maintained a carefully controlled facade, keeping my expression neutral, even mildly amused at Alex's attempts to belittle me. Deep down, however, I was seething. I couldn't fathom why Sarah had chosen tonight, of all nights, to stand quietly by while Alex tore into something that meant so much to me. It wasn't the running itself that mattered, but the deliberate attempt to degrade and undermine me publicly. Alex's tactics were transparent, and yet Sarah seemed either oblivious or indifferent to the damage being done. I discreetly glanced around the table, observing the reactions of our guests. Some appeared embarrassed, avoiding eye contact, while others chuckled politely, likely uncertain how else to respond. It was obvious that Alex had successfully turned my passion into a punchline, positioning himself confidently at the center of attention, while I sat quietly sidelined. A part of me desperately wanted to confront Alex directly, to challenge his arrogance head-on and reclaim my dignity in front of everyone. But I knew that reacting emotionally would only further his goal. Making a scene at Sarah's party was precisely what he wanted, providing him an opportunity to appear calm and rational while portraying me as insecure or jealous. Instead, I chose to wait, silently enduring his taunts, biding my time as I quietly gathered my thoughts. There would be a moment when Alex pushed too far, when his smug confidence blinded him into believing I posed no threat. Only then would I act decisively. Until that moment, I remained composed, allowing Alex and Sarah to mistake my silence for weakness or acceptance. As Alex's mocking continued, he grew visibly more confident, taking increasingly bold risks in the pursuit of Sarah's approval. Each carefully aimed insult toward me seemed to embolden him, leading him to believe he had already won. Watching Sarah smile approvingly at his every word, I felt an icy resolve forming within me. Their joint disrespect had crossed a line I could no longer tolerate, and though I refused to ruin Sarah's party with open conflict, I silently promised myself that neither of them would leave this evening feeling victorious. The restaurant's gentle atmosphere now felt suffocating, my carefully arranged celebration having transformed into an uncomfortable battlefield. My pulse quickened, adrenaline mixing with quiet anger. I realized with absolute clarity that Alex had grossly underestimated me, mistaking my calmness for cowardice. He had made his move openly, confident he could humiliate me into submission. But he had no idea what I was capable of, and soon, very soon, he would discover the depth of his mistake. As the evening progressed, Alex's confidence grew steadily more insufferable. He seemed emboldened by the laughter he had drawn from some of our guests, unaware, or perhaps unconcerned, by the discomfort quietly spreading around the table. Sarah continued smiling warmly at him, occasionally glancing at me as if daring me to challenge the humiliation I'd silently endured. Each time she met my eyes, there was an unsettling mixture of amusement and something colder, almost disappointment, as though she had hoped I'd respond more forcefully. Her attitude left me quietly furious yet determined to remain composed. By now, the restaurant had dimmed its lights further, creating a false sense of intimacy that only heightened my feeling of isolation. Candles flickered softly, casting shadows across the faces of our guests, some of whom had grown visibly uncomfortable as Alex escalated his provocations. Conversations became subdued whispers, punctuated by forced chuckles meant to ease tension, but nothing truly broke the mounting awkwardness at our table. Noticing the dwindling amusement around him, Alex, clearly sensing he'd lost some momentum, suddenly shifted tactics. With exaggerated bravado, he announced loudly that we needed some excitement, something to energize the party. His eyes narrowed playfully as he glanced directly at me. He suggested, with mock innocence, that perhaps it would be entertaining to have a friendly arm wrestling match, just a simple competition to settle the question of who was stronger. Sarah immediately laughed, openly supporting the idea, her gaze turning expectantly toward me. It was clear they both assumed I'd refuse, allowing Alex another opportunity to ridicule my supposed lack of masculinity. Guests exchanged uneasy looks, clearly unsure whether to encourage or discourage the odd request. A few hesitant murmurs rippled through the table, though no one openly protested. It was evident everyone saw this as Alex's personal challenge directed toward me alone, a test he confidently expected to win. My hesitation was brief, tempered by a growing sense of quiet determination. I knew exactly what Alex was trying to do. He intended to publicly confirm his perceived superiority, expecting my refusal or swift defeat to cement my humiliation in Sarah's eyes. But this time, he had seriously misjudged his opponent. What Alex and Sarah didn't know, what none of our friends or guests knew, was that long before I'd become a dedicated runner, I'd spent years wrestling competitively in high school and college. Running was merely the sport I pursued now to maintain my fitness and peace of mind. Wrestling, however, had been my first true passion, a discipline I'd trained tirelessly in, honing both physical strength and mental discipline. Although I had stepped away from competition years ago, the strength and technique I'd once possessed had never completely faded. Tonight, Alex had unknowingly invited me to reclaim a part of myself I had quietly tucked away, forgotten by almost everyone, especially Sarah. With an easy, unbothered smile, I accepted Alex's challenge. A momentary flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked by a cocky grin, likely assuming my agreement was born purely out of desperation or foolish bravado. Sarah's eyes sparkled with amusement, obviously delighted by the impending spectacle. I could sense she was already envisioning my swift defeat, an outcome that would seemingly justify her apparent attraction to Alex's overt masculinity. Guests rearranged chairs and cleared space on the table, creating a makeshift arena. I quietly rolled up my sleeves, revealing arms lean from years of running but still visibly strong, muscles defined clearly beneath my skin. Alex did the same, flexing theatrically for the crowd, eliciting laughter and applause. He took his position opposite me with exaggerated casualness, seemingly confident this would be a short-lived contest. But beneath his arrogant posturing, I saw something fleeting, a brief hesitation, perhaps the faintest doubt stirred by the ease with which I'd agreed to the challenge. As our hands clasped firmly, I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline surge through me, a sensation I hadn't experienced in years. I could sense the strength in Alex's grip. He was indeed strong, likely someone who regularly worked out, confident in his physical abilities. But beneath my calm exterior was years of discipline and hidden strength, quietly waiting to be rediscovered. Around us, guests held their breaths, the air thick with tension and anticipation. Sarah leaned in closer, eager to witness what she believed would be my embarrassing defeat. The moment our match began, Alex immediately tried to overpower me, exerting significant pressure to force my hand down quickly. His arm muscles flexed visibly, veins prominent beneath his skin as he strained against my grip. Yet, to everyone's surprise, including Alex's, my arm didn't move even an inch. His confidence quickly dissolved into visible confusion, followed by alarm, as he realized he had severely underestimated me. For several tense seconds, we remained locked together, his face reddening from effort, a thin sheen of sweat forming on his forehead. Around us, the silence grew deafening as guests began to sense Alex's mounting desperation. I held firm, calmly meeting Alex's gaze, letting him see clearly that I'd been holding back, patiently allowing him to exhaust his strength. Panic briefly flashed in his eyes as he understood that he had fallen into a carefully laid trap. Slowly, deliberately, I began applying steady pressure against his weakening resistance, gently forcing his arm downward inch by inch. He struggled desperately, grunting softly as he fought in vain against my grip. I maintained steady eye contact, calmly demonstrating my complete control over the situation. Sarah's expression shifted drastically, her smug amusement quickly replaced by shocked disbelief, then embarrassment as Alex's arm finally touched the table with an audible thud. The entire table erupted briefly into stunned silence, then cautious applause broke out among our guests, uncertain but clearly impressed. Alex stood up abruptly, his face flushed crimson with humiliation, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Without another word, he walked away from the table, disappearing quickly toward the restroom to compose himself. I calmly returned my sleeves to their normal position, quietly accepting congratulatory remarks from those nearby. Sarah, however, stood frozen, visibly shaken by this unexpected turn of events. For once, she appeared genuinely uncertain, clearly taken aback by my calm dominance in front of everyone whose approval she valued. I said nothing, merely offering her a polite but distant smile, silently acknowledging that the celebration she'd attempted to manipulate had just dramatically shifted in my favor. Yet, despite the brief satisfaction of this small victory, deep inside I knew the real challenge still awaited. Alex had only been a symptom, a small, arrogant pawn emboldened by Sarah's subtle approval. As the evening slowly resumed, I silently resolved that tonight's events had only just begun to unfold, and that what would come next would test us both in ways neither had anticipated. After the guests began dispersing from the restaurant, the atmosphere shifted, growing subdued as everyone quietly sensed the night had reached an unexpected and awkward conclusion. Alex never returned to our table. I noticed him quietly slipping out through a side exit, clearly unwilling or unable to face the humiliation of his public defeat. Sarah, now noticeably distant, struggled to maintain the facade of joyful gratitude as our remaining friends and family offered final birthday wishes and gentle goodbyes. I remained composed, speaking calmly and graciously to each guest, despite the emotional storm still raging within me. Sarah, perhaps sensing my quiet withdrawal, avoided my eyes, becoming overly attentive to the guests who remained. It felt as though we were strangers, standing mere feet apart yet separated by something intangible, something deeper and more troubling than I'd ever imagined. Eventually, after the last of our guests had wished us good night, Sarah and I drove home together in tense silence. Neither of us spoke, each lost in our own troubled thoughts. When we arrived, Sarah went straight upstairs without a word, locking herself in the bathroom as the sound of the shower quickly followed. I stood alone in the hallway, feeling both anger and sorrow at the distance that had suddenly opened between us. But beneath the turmoil lay something more unsettling, a sharp instinctual suspicion that refused to leave my thoughts. I paced the living room restlessly, my mind replaying the night's events again and again. The humiliation, the flirtation between Sarah and Alex, it all hinted at something darker, something I felt compelled to understand fully. Driven by this gnawing unease, I approached Sarah's phone, which lay abandoned on the kitchen counter, screen facing downward. I knew it was wrong, an invasion of her privacy, but the weight of suspicion and the pain of betrayal I felt justified my actions. I needed answers. Picking up the phone, my pulse quickened as I unlocked it, Sarah's passcode as familiar to me as my own. I quickly navigated to her recent messages and felt my heart plunge heavily into my chest. The screen illuminated with a series of exchanges between Sarah and Alex, messages filled with flirtation and thinly veiled invitations. My stomach tightened as I scrolled through the texts, discovering the evidence I had feared. Alex had boldly invited Sarah to meet him at a local motel the following afternoon. Sarah's response, coy yet clearly receptive, made it clear this wasn't their first rendezvous. I stood frozen, my breath shallow, a whirlwind of emotions threatening to overwhelm me, rage, hurt, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of disgust. Everything Sarah and I had built together suddenly felt hollow, built on illusions and deceit. The evening's humiliation paled compared to this deeper betrayal. Yet, even as anger surged through me, I found clarity in the certainty of what I had to do next. I would not simply confront her, I needed definitive proof. Sarah deserved no opportunity to spin her betrayal into something harmless or innocent. The following morning, Sarah cheerfully mentioned plans to meet her friends for brunch. I merely nodded, maintaining a carefully neutral expression despite the bitterness rising in my throat. When she left, I waited briefly before discreetly following her in my own car. My heart pounded erratically as I watched her drive past the familiar cafes we'd frequented for years, heading instead toward a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, anger mingling with quiet resolve as she parked beside Alex's waiting car. Silently, I parked some distance away, hidden partially by a line of trees, and watched them enter a shabby room at the far end of the motel. I captured clear photographs as undeniable proof of their infidelity. Without hesitation, I sent the images anonymously to their employer, attaching details clearly identifying both Sarah and Alex. I knew the fallout would be severe, irreversible, and entirely deserved. Sarah's birthday celebration had become a turning point, not just for our marriage, but for her entire life. She had gambled recklessly, assuming her deception would remain undiscovered. But now, her lies had finally caught up with her. An hour later, as Sarah and Alex exited the motel room laughing casually, their expressions changed instantly upon seeing me standing calmly by my car, waiting. Alex looked away, clearly humiliated and panicked, while Sarah froze in place, her face pale, disbelief quickly replaced by desperation. She tried stammering an explanation, something about it being a mistake, that she hadn't meant for it to happen. Her words fell on deaf ears. I held up the phone displaying the photographic evidence, watching her excuses dissolve into silence. Returning home, Sarah's anger flared, accusing me of invading her privacy, deflecting blame desperately in an attempt to salvage what little remained of her dignity. I stayed calm, unmoved by her theatrics, and told her that her betrayal had left her with nothing, not her marriage, not her reputation, and soon, not her career. Defeated, she began to pack her belongings without further protest, realizing the consequences of her actions had finally caught up with her. By evening, news reached us that Alex had already been fired, escorted out of their company office under judgmental eyes. Sarah, too, would soon face similar consequences. Standing alone in the quiet house later that night, I felt an odd mixture of emptiness and relief. Sarah's absence was painful yet liberating. The truth, though bitter, had given me strength. The humiliation of the previous night no longer mattered. Instead, it had transformed into a moment of clarity and empowerment. I had lost Sarah, true, but I had reclaimed something far more precious: my dignity, my self-respect, and my ability to see clearly the truth I'd long overlooked. My marriage had ended abruptly, not in quiet decay but in sharp confrontation, leaving me alone yet undeniably stronger. As I stood in the darkened room, I realized that sometimes the harshest endings create space for a new beginning. The celebration that went disastrously wrong ultimately became my liberation, a painful but necessary catalyst for reclaiming control of my life.